Hey guys, so I had the supreme honor of being a featured clinician at the Chicago Drum Show, and what follows in this video is the entirety of my clinic, along with some awesome questions. The people that came were amazing, and I had a blast getting to discuss my favorite topic, handmade cymbals. So if you end up liking this video, please hit the thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell if you want notifications. And until next time, I'm Timothy Roberts. I am a cymbal smith. So all the instruments up here are actually instruments that I've made. I started out as a drum maker. This is the very first kit I ever built. It's kind of ratty. It's kind of messed up, which is why I love it. I like vibey things. I like imperfect sounds. I like things that are a little bit off, kind of make you just ear perks up a little bit. So I started out as a drum builder, and I've been on this journey of becoming a cymbal smith and learning this dark art, this craft that feels mystical. Probably to a lot of us, it's a kind of a mystical thing. How do people make cymbals? Drums are kind of simple. You got to drill them where you're supposed to drill them, and you put the piece of hardware there, and then tension it up, and there it is. It's a drum. Cymbals are not that way. They're like, no two are the same. They can be made in a variety of different ways. And the lineage that I come from is one of the kind of the old world, old school style, where you take a blank, which I don't have a blank up here, but I've got one in my booth, and there's one in Dave Collingwood's booth. If you want to see what the instruments start out as. So they get cast, copper and tin, and they come out of the forge. They get bells stamped into them sometimes. Other times it's just a flat potato chip looking thing. And in the style of cymbal making that I do, it's all cold forming. So I sit at an anvil with a hammer, and I swing that hammer for hours and hours and hours and hours. And I'm able to add tension into the metal, compression points, and build in curvature. And at the end of the day, I have a cymbal. Obviously, I got to turn it on the lathe and dial in taper and all that kind of stuff. And as I've been diving into this instrument, I was an avid collector for about a decade and did a little bit of touring. Was lucky enough to travel and play and get to play in all kinds of different rooms. And I was collecting instruments, and now that I'm a maker, it's like a whole nother level to the creative expression. And all of us are drummers in here. We're all looking for our sound, and it's kind of hard to wade through the marketing. Like, how do I find my sound? Do I go with the company that's got the slickest marketing? Do I go with the company that has my favorite drummer? How do I find that sound? So a lot of us, we can probably all relate to buying cymbals. It's not quite what I wanted, sell it. Buy another one. It's closer, but it's still not quite what I want, sell it. And part of that is, I think, part of the process. There's no perfect fix to that, but there is this search that we all go through. I sat down with the cymbals that we brought to the show that we have at my booth, and I just picked out random ones that were speaking to me in the moment. These aren't my personal set of cymbals. They're all available, by the way. We'll tag that in there. But they were just the ones that spoke to me in the moment. And they sounded really good to me down in the room. And then I brought them up here, and my experience with them in this room is different. What I played was kind of different than what I was playing downstairs. And so there's this kind of magic that happens as we really start to dive into sound and try to discover what it is our voice is as a musician. I'll give you a really quick rundown of the manufacturing process with cymbals and tell you a little bit about what I do and what a lot of other cymbal smiths do. So I told you we cold form the metal, we're hammering it for hours and hours, and we're building the kind of shape that we want. And if you go to any of the major manufacturers, I'll just say up front, nothing that I say is meant to disparage any other company, because I think it's all sound. So if you connect with a Paiste, great. That might be your sound. Paiste might do exactly what you want your cymbals to do. That might be the best place to go. Same with all the other big companies. For me, I was always looking for something a little bit deeper, the expression, kind of this ability to pull out different sounds, like a cymbal that You hit it in one place, it gave you one sound. You hit it in a different place, and it gave you something different. Maybe it like hummed in a weird way. But when you move it away from where that hum is, all of a sudden it starts to sing in a way that's interesting. And I'm a part of the lineage of what started with Roberto Spizzichino, who is an Italian cymbal maker, who he's kind of the godfather, the very first independent cymbalsmith. He worked at the company UFIP for a while. He did the kind of, helped them manufacture cymbals in a more mass-produced way. And he left and wanted something that was a little bit more like the old Ks that we all hear about. You guys know about old Ks, I'm sure. Those were the cymbals that back in the 100 years ago, 70 years ago, they were being made in the same manner that the independent cymbalsmiths are making cymbals today. So they didn't have crazy machines. They didn't have CNC programs to just pop a piece of metal in and hit a button, and then it pops out a cymbal. It wasn't a widget style instrument. It was all done by hand. And the amazing thing that to be a little bit self-serving here, the amazing thing about where we're at in this moment in time is that you can get basically an old K, not really an old K, but like the spirit and the heart behind those instruments. They're being made by people today that a lot of us are drummers. We actually loved the instrument first and came into making the instrument after. And so we've built our ears. That's a huge part of being a musician, obviously, is like developing your ears, listening to all kinds of music, not just the music you like. Listen to the music you don't like, see what it can speak to you, see what it can say to you. And so we build our ears, we're trying to search for our sound. And a part of that for me was actually learning to make the instrument was the next level of trying to figure out what I wanted to say as a drummer. And now I feel like I'm more in love with making cymbals than I am with playing. And I swing a hammer all day, so my fine motor skills are kind of shot. So I'm like, man, my hand's a little bit more sluggish than it used to be from holding a 2-pound hammer for 6 hours a day. Yeah, and so I wanted to just demonstrate some cymbals. I'm going to open up for questions at times. And yeah, I'm interested in sharing about how the indie cymbalsmith movement right now feels kind of like pigeonholed into what a lot of people would say jazz cymbals. A lot of indies are making jazz cymbals, but most drummers don't play exclusively jazz, right? Like how many exclusively jazz drummers do we have in this room? Okay, not even a single hand. Okay. Oh, no, he was kidding. Not a single one. So we play all styles. There's a lot of rock guys in here, I'm sure, right? We got guys that play vibey indie rock stuff, maybe some funk and hip hop, maybe, it runs the gambit. And I would love, with my YouTube channel that I have and kind of the things that I'm trying to do, I would love for us to kind of break out of that pigeonhole of us being known as jazz cymbal makers, because you can get a handmade cymbal that's a rock and roll cymbal, and it can give you something that you just can't get from a major manufacturer. I brought one cymbal. I'm kind of a jazz guy, but I've played a lot of rock and done a lot of studio stuff, and when I play a cymbal that I make, fully hand hammered, it's just heavier. That extra mass gives me the clarity and the presence I need to have a bell that cuts through a rock band. And so with it, I would like to kind of get out of genre and think more of just sound. Like what kind of expression are we trying, what kind of statement are we trying to make? And I would argue that with an independent cymbalsmith, there's many of them. There's 8 of us here, 9 of us probably, 10 maybe, I don't know. There's a lot of us here actually at the show. We all have kind of our own unique take on sound, and we make instruments that serve a variety of functions. To make it super simple, it's the different kind of alloys we typically work with and that you'll typically see is a combination of copper and tin. Sometimes there's trace elements of other metals, but to make it simple, copper and tin. The amount of tin you have in the alloy determines a lot about the sound. So what I'm making is almost exclusively B20 bronze, 80% copper, 20% tin. It's the most common alloy that you'll find. You can get a tremendous amount of sounds out of B20 alloy. I mentioned Paiste before. Paiste has a lot of B10, B12, B15. A lot of times entry-level cymbals are like B8. And those are, we think of them as like, oh, those are cheap, crappy cymbals, but it's just a different kind of sound. It's a different kind of alloy that has different properties. And so take, for instance, like if you were to take a B20 cymbal, a B8 cymbal, and you had, theoretically, if you could possibly have them made exactly the same by hand. So the same exact hammering, the same exact taper and weight and all that. You would have a drastic different sound. And say if you had those cymbals very thin, you would have a really muddy, dry, kind of sort of non-existent sound coming from the B8. Whereas the B20 would have a lot of high-end and sparkle and life to the sound. And so what that is the tin is what's giving us the brittleness in the alloy, and it's giving us the sustain and a lot of the high end. So a lot of non-B20 cymbals, or a lot of Pisces and then a lot of like cheaper cymbals are going to be a lot heavier to make up for the fact that they're a little bit kind of dead if they're too thin. So the extra mass makes them cut more. And what happens with the metal itself is if you strike a B20 cymbal, the stiffness because of the tin, it's going to kind of like bend and come back to shape. Whereas non-B20 will tend to bend and sort of stay where it is. It doesn't have as much like rebound to it. And so it's kind of hard to break a non-B20 cymbal, but you actually do have a brittleness in a B8 is kind of hard to crack because it usually will just kind of bend and warp before it eventually cracks. But a B20 can crack because it has this extra level of rigidity, and that translates to the sound, basically. I don't even think about that as far as like it's jazz construction but heavier. It's just cymbal construction heavier. And there's different kinds of constructions that some associate with different styles, but you were alluding to like the curvature of a cymbal. And like to take an example, so sort through what I have. So this cymbal right here is, I would classify it as a little bit of a taller, more umbrella-shaped cymbal. So I'm going to try to boil this down simply. So basically, yeah, so there's a little bit of a bigger bell. The curvature is a bit bigger. When we ignore the weight and the different topography and different things, what I hear is a little bit of this higher pitch and a little bit drier too. Now if I go to something like this that's a little bit lower, there's this like fundamental pitch that's sitting lower and it's not as dry. So we build the curvature up and it shoots the pitch up, like the fundamental pitch up. And so say you want a rock cymbal and you want dry and you want it really high pitch, really cutting. Taller shape, bigger bell, heavy. And you got it. And a lot of Zildjians in the 80s and 90s, they were trying to compete with big Marshall stacks. And so I get modifications and people send me these Zildjians from the 80s and 90s all the time because they're these big profiles, big bells, really heavy. Most cutting kind of cymbal. The bigger bell is giving you more volume, perceived volume.
This modification meaning you're laying them down to...
Yeah. They're saying like, here's this rock ride, please make it into a jazz ride. And it's like, oh, okay. Right. I'll try. Whereas if we have a low flat shape, the fundamental pitch is lower. And so say you take low flat shape, low fundamental, and thin. It's going to be washy, dark, low pitched. But you'll sacrifice the definition on the stick. So there's a lot of these cymbals out here now, and it's kind of, in my opinion, it's the manufacturing process. It's like we're trying to make, bigger companies are trying to make cymbals as quick as possible, as fast as possible, and get them out, make their money, right? So there's these low shapes, and they're really thin, and they're not really tuned very well because they're done on a machine. And you have this, maybe growly crash, low pitch, wash, but then when you try to play a ride pattern on that or you try to hit the bell, it's just non-existent. in certain situations. Like you can't get that to cut and translate through the music. And so some of that is just the tuning of it is not proper. There's not like a skilled craftsman coming in and actually tensioning the metal in a way that it's cohesive. It makes sense. The sound waves are flowing up and down in a way that gives you a usable sound. And so we have like these versatile sounds, and then we have these super funky sounds. And so we're trying to find in that spectrum where we want our cymbals to live. So the super funky ones might be really inspiring when you're sitting behind them, but you take that on the bandstand, and is that going to do the job for you necessarily? Maybe not. Whereas the super versatile cymbals might not be as inspiring when you're sitting behind them, but that bell will cut, the band can hear the time. And so that's like the challenge we have. For me, as a cymbal maker, I'm thinking most people are buying cymbals and they're just thinking about what they hear behind the kit. They're not thinking about even how it translates, 10 feet in front. And I'm listening to this cymbal. If I'm playing a rock groove, there's a lot of wash that's building up, and that the stick definition is kind of getting drowned out. So if I take a cymbal that's maybe more proper for rock, the build-up kind of stops. And I was building it into the same volume I was playing that other cymbal, but it's kind of like it's being capped. It's like the volume of that wash is being capped. And a cymbal like this I could take to a rock gig any day and get the job done. Or even like Latin jazz, or heck, even big band. If you've got like 15 horns and you're trying to like swing, can a horn player over there feel that? Hear that beat, feel that time? So in contrast, this is a much thinner cymbal. I'm playing this fast jazz pattern, but there's all this buildup of sound. But if I'm in a cafe, that's nice. Like you can hear the time when I'm playing that in that kind of volume, right? You can hear that ride beat. The second I start digging in, and if I need that cymbal to go there, this cymbal won't go there for me if I'm playing a big band gig. It will in a lot of other environments, especially if it's like, say you play in church. Or there's different types of church gigs, but say you're modern CCM, like you just need a big washy ride because you're not really trying to hear the time. There's a big click in your head just doing beep, 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 so everybody's hearing that. And then you get to that point where you're like, do that for 5 minutes, and then the song ends. So that would be a great cymbal for some rock, for some church, some types of church gigs, because there's not a lot of that kind of riding on top of the cymbal. So part of this is like knowing the genre of music that you play, knowing some of the tropes surrounding the music that you play. And then within that, knowing how to kind of see through some marketing, some marketing stuff and seeing past maybe what your favorite drummer plays, so you can actually know like what is the cymbal that will actually do the job for you as a drummer. Like you need something that you can express yourself on. That might be the funkiest, wildest, gnarliest sounding, trashiest, whatever cymbal. It also might be the most bland, boring, versatile, whatever cymbal to someone else. There's a gamut there. So hope that answers your question. What's up? Right, yeah, that's a good question. So with that, it's super important to just state, it really comes down to manufacturing methods. With a bigger company, and this might, I don't know, maybe this might get me in trouble or whatever to say this, but we all think that the Turkish companies are hand hammering their cymbals. They're not. Hot take, sorry. They're not hand hammering their cymbals. They were 20 years ago, but they've got machines now. I've seen pictures of very famous factories in Turkey where it's just a line of like 10 machines that don't have an operator on them at all, but they do a style of hammering that looks very hand hammered. And so,
Name the machines, maybe that might help.
what's that?
They could name the machines.
Right, there you go. Yeah, give them human names, right? And with that, like a company, you got to think like the difference between a craftsman, an artisan, and a company. A company's got to sell product. They've got to get product out the door. So with that, technology advances. These cymbal companies a lot of them use profile presses. So they take that flat piece, and the hours I spend to hammer, in 30 seconds, they go shoop and pull the shape up. Then they go in and they have the machine that kind of hammers it, because otherwise just a profile press cymbal is weird. It's like it lives in the uncanny valley of like sound. You're like, what is? It's very, very tonal and chimey, and it's like, where's the darkness in that? Where's the versatility in that? It's kind of like, it's like borderline. It's giving me like a pitched instrument kind of vibe without being really pitched. So they do that. They profile press it. They take it to the machines. The machines hit it just enough. But the difference between a cymbal that's had hundreds of hammer strikes versus one that's had, or maybe even upwards of 1,000 plus hammer strikes versus one that's had a couple hundred hammer strikes, is this extra level of darkness. So to your question about, with indies making rock cymbals, we have methods of being able to hand hammer in a way that gets us to our shape quicker. We're still hand hammering and having to compress the metal hundreds of times, but it can get us to a shape quicker. And if we can get our shape with as few hammer strikes as possible, we could give you a rock ride that you're like, wow, this has an extra level of dimension to it, and intrigue to it, and darkness, or clarity and cut, or different frequencies that are hitting in a way that they project better. And a lot of that, I said it on a video recently, I was talking about like this spectrum of sound quality. I know sound is super subjective, but say there's this spectrum of sound quality. Up here is the best major manufacturer can possibly produce. Not because they're worse, they're the ones that have been around for a long time, especially Zildjian, over 100 years. The lineage goes back 400 years. They've been doing it a long time. So it's not about they don't have the skill. It's just the method, just the manufacturing process. So there's like a cap to how good those cymbals can sound. And I think there's a whole realm above that where certain indies can make cymbals in this whole realm above that. For any genre, not pigeonholed into just jazz or just, old case style, clone, tribute, whatever, There's this extra level that you just can't get. And then beyond that, there's this sense that you can find a person that kind of speaks to you. You like their vibe, whatever it is. A lot of the cymbalsmiths here are like my friends. They all have their own voice. You might connect with a person, and then they make you an instrument, which is they listen to you. I have email threads that are very, very long, going back and forth asking, what kind of stick do you use? What kind of genre do you play? Hey, can you send me a video of yourself playing? I want to get a sense for how you play and the way you express yourself. And then I use all that information to create an instrument, for you. So It just means different designs that produce different sounds.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's a marketing thing.
There's so much marketing in this world, and that's actually a very good segue to something I wanted to talk about with just the uniqueness of all these. You know, obviously there's a difference, like related to food, right? Sometimes you just want a Wendy's hamburger, right? And you're like, it just gets the job done, you know. Sometimes you want to go to a restaurant and there's this chef who curates meals and it's a different menu every night. And you go and you're like, I want to see what they're going to be offering tonight. And you're excited for this kind of surprise to happen. You know, that's similar, you know. And I would argue that with, you know, nothing bad about fast food, but like a lot of the bigger companies to me produce fast food cymbals. and sometimes you need it, right? It has its place, it has its function. It's not about disparaging it. Sometimes you're looking for something a little bit more, right? But then the other element is that, you know, that fast food function of like versatility, cut, get the job done on the rock gig. You know, that can be provided by an indie that also you have an instrument that you're also inspired to play, and it's also interesting. And you would put it in your drum room, and it's bright and loud and pingy. It's got a ton of cut, and you would love to just sit there and play it by yourself all day. That can exist too. And so it's that spectrum of high versatility versus high funkiness and uniqueness. And so you can really find that. So it is impossible to recreate a cymbal. Completely impossible. And even I would argue, you know, from the majors, like they can't recreate cymbals either. You know, maybe it's easier with a non-B20 alloy. So those things can come in perfectly flat sheets, like literally perfect thicknesses all the way around. If you're getting a B20 instrument, it's rolled in this mill, and the mill, you know, the rolling mill might not be calibrated perfectly, and so there's different parts that are thicker and others that are thinner, and so two K Constantinople rides are going to sound vastly different next to each other. And you might hear that one that your favorite drummer played and go, wow, that cymbal's awesome. You go and you hit purchase online, and it comes to your door, and you're like, that is not what I heard. I've heard that story a million times. And again, that's not to disparage the company. That's just to say it is a limitation of the business model and how they manufacture the instruments. But one thing I was going to say, so like Lee Ruff is downstairs. Lee Ruff was Roberto Spizzichino's U.S. distributor, dealer for years. Good friend of Roberto. And if you find a Spizzichino ride, it is very expensive. I don't know if any of you guys know prices of those. I mean, they can be $3,500. They can be $2,500. You get a cracked one. You find one that's cracked. It's got to be repaired. $1,200 still. You know. So those, and it's because he's passed away. You know, rest in peace. And his instruments are becoming more rare. It's a finite resource. All of that. But Roberto had this really interesting concept with cymbals because he didn't like cymbals to sound beautiful. He's like, tons of places and craftsmen make beautiful sounds. I want to make like ugly sounds, you know, like ugly sounds that have soul. And so you might hit it up near the bell and it goes wah, 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 it honks at you a little bit. But then you come to this other spot and you find this area it sounds sweeter. You're like, ooh, that's interesting. And then if you listen, you learn to listen to it, you can start to hear how that honk is like feeding the part that you like. And if that honk wasn't there and it was dialed perfectly, it would be less interesting. And so, you know, he was a really eccentric cat. He would like, what I've heard is that he would, you know, finish a day of work and he'd bring a cymbal home with him. And his wife would be there and he would just kind of clear the dining room table. She'd serve dinner and he would just like clear the dining room table and put the cymbal on the table and sit there and eat and just look at the cymbal. Really esoteric, weird guy. But he was like he was looking at it, trying to figure out, what did I do to that? And there's an element too with this where like I have lines of cymbals, but part of it, I don't really know how it's going to turn out. And that's like part of the fun of it. Like it's this discovery of like, what is going to happen to this metal when I hammer it? Also, depending on my mindset, you know, a conversation that I had with a friend is making me mad, and I just get kind of angry and I start swinging the hammer. And then at the end of the day, it's like, whoa, that has something in it. That cymbal that I made has something in it. And then other times I'm just like lit up by the joy of life. And like my daughter came and gave me a hug and a kiss. I'm just like, oh, life is beautiful. and I go and make cymbals, and then there's something different that comes out. And it's, in that way, I would argue it is kind of like art in a way that it's like it has to be, the expression of the craftsman is in the work, you know? And I might come in and say, I want to make, you know, one of my Landmark series rides, which is a little bit more dirty and complex sounding. And I start making it, and then it's like I start to feel something in the metal, and I just change my mind, and I'm getting into kind of a flow state, and then it just goes off and veers off into this totally different thing that I never thought I would make. And then I have this instrument that, like, wow, that surprised me. And I think surprise and curiosity are two really interesting things that we experience as musicians. Like the idea of being surprised. I don't hear many people talk about it. Like you see musicians play on stage, and they're playing, and then their bandmate does some kind of phrase, and you just see them go, whoa, and they like smile, and they're like, oh, I can't believe you did that. Like it's this moment where they kind of get hit with this thing they weren't expecting. And that's what I find so fun about music, and also with instruments. It's like if you can hit something that kind of gives you this like almost shock, it's inspiring. You know, if you just hit something and it doesn't give you any response, or you're like, okay, yeah, it's a cymbal, then maybe it's not gonna elicit something from you that might help you dig in and push your boundaries as a player and like dive into things that you've never played before. So I find that really fascinating. And so with the indies, there's this, we're trying to kind of compete in a way, sort of like, you know, at least make our stamp and kind of carve out our own little industry. And some guys are kind of trying to really compete with the big guys, and some are really just like, I'm doing my own thing, and it all belongs, you know. But there is this sense of surprise and danger and curiosity, and just where the unknown, you don't really know how things are going to turn out. And then it's cool to see a finished product that has all of that built behind it, rather than something that's, you know, it came on an assembly line, it was stamped, it was hammered the same way, and it was sent out, you know. I think that stuff is like, there's like a spiritual sense to it where like you almost feel that in an instrument that has care and attention and time put into it. There's a certain feeling that's like, whoa, I don't know what it is. Call it God, call it the universe, call it whatever, you know. But it can actually help you, you know. And my goal with all of these, like I'm making this instrument, but I'm not keeping it for myself. Like I'm sending it out. The goal is that someone with a totally different life experience and different opinions, you know, different, all kinds of stuff, is going to take that instrument and make it their own and kind of like incorporate it into their sound. I find that super gratifying and interesting, and that's the collaborative community thing with music. Like music really should be people coming together and learning how to compromise with each other, learning how to like not step on each other's toes, learning how to, you know, that's all a part of it. So, you know, long story short, like the independents we're trying to provide like something that fits into that aesthetic. And it's becoming more and more possible now to actually have access to this kind of quality of instrument, and which it hasn't been. Like Roberto passed in 2011. He was really, his heyday was like 1990 to 2011. Like, that's not that long ago. It was so hard. You had to like fly to Italy and like take a 4-hour car ride up into the mountains and then visit this wizard up in the mountains making cymbals to have access to that kind of instrument. And nowadays you have like people all over the world that are doing phenomenal work that you can reach out to. It's just a little bit of research and you can find who they are. I find that really exciting about this time. Anywhere from 2 hours to 10 hours in my own experience. Sometimes, you know, I'm like firing on all cylinders, and I just sit down and I like get transported, and 2 hours later it's like, here it is, it's done. Like I'm not touching that again. I don't care how it rests, like it's all choked because I've just hammered it. I'm just like, that is done. And I set it aside. Other times I do that, I revisit it the next day. Maybe I let it sit for a week or 2 weeks or a month or 6 months. I pull it back out. I tweak it again. You know, that can happen too. So it's very, very, very varied in that respect. So yeah, 20 minutes, 30 minutes to lathe. Yeah.
Start hammering.
Yeah, and I do some layerings. I'll hammer, lathe. I find that creates like a level of dimension to the sound, you know. Yes. So imagine you're trying to play fast chops on a snare drum tuned like this, versus playing fast chops on something that's like a CCM or like a 70s rock snare, and it's like really loose. So it's like there's a response and a feel that does allow you to play certain styles of music and pull certain sounds out. And you could theoretically take like a floor tom, tune both heads equally, play it, and it gives you a certain feel. And theoretically, if you could get the same sound by tuning the top head more loosely than the bottom head, but you're getting the same sound, it's going to feel different and it's going to pull a different sound out of you. Same is true with cymbals. So like, the metal is held in tension, and so I can hammer on the bottom and do various things to the bottom to kind of loosen that tension a little bit, to where you kind of hit it and it has this sort of like pillowy feel and it like wobbles like a jellyfish a little bit. And that might be what I want. Like this cymbal to me has kind of a softness to it that I like. And you can see, if you're looking close, you can kind of see the edges are sort of waving a little bit. And so I can play really like legato, kind of like, lean into it, and it's like I'm like swimming in water, right? A cymbal like this, the taller one, is like we had talked about earlier, is like a little bit more stiff, and so I don't necessarily want to. It's not going to give me the same response trying to like dig into it. Like it's stiffer and it kind of pushes me back a little bit. Like I want to do that and it's stiff. So that to me gives me more of like a kind of aggressive sound, like it's going to cut more. I kind of feel like a little more angry when I play this cymbal. I feel more like, yeah, cool, vibey, groovy,
Frequency definitely influences mood.
And yeah, frequency too. Like that higher frequency of that taller shape is cutting more. It's more aggressive and in your face. It's a smaller cymbal too. This is a big thin cymbal, smaller, stiffer cymbal. What's that? Yeah, so when I make flats, I make them really thin. Going back to the thing about the bell, no bell is all about stick definition. So you're going to really hear the tick. So the bell gets bigger. You start to hear volume, and I would call it perceived volume, because really it's like the volume of the wash that's building.
I've seen jazz drummers play that cymbal.
Yeah.
Only.
Right, yeah. And a lot of flats are heavy, and it's just that kind of a heavy flat is like, Roy Haynes, now he sings, now he psalms, which that's not a heavy flat, but Paiste makes beautiful flat rides. Like my favorite flat rides are from the bigger companies. It's definitely Paiste. When I make flats, I know, because I know the kind of the physics of it, I know that no bell means that stick definition's still going to sit on top, even if it's really thin. So like, but then what I'm getting that I don't get from a heavier one is I get something that I can crash. Flat rides don't typically have the volume and the sustain to crash. So, I can, speaking of like only playing this, I can only play this flat ride and get a lot of different sounds out of it. And it's like that, I feel there's plenty of presence in that stick definition to carry, even though it's really, really thin. If this cymbal was this thin, this exact shape, but had a big bell, it would be one of the other ones that's kind of wild, and it builds up with all this sustain and all these overtones, and it kind of starts to muddy and kind of overshadow the clarity of your stick. And then a lot of times, like I talk about stick definition a lot because, obviously it's important for timekeeping, regardless of the genre that you're playing. But especially with jazz, it's like jazz artists want this nuanced, complex. And by complex, complex is an overused word, but I kind of like to think of complex as just interesting. Lots of tones, interesting. You can listen and zone in on certain sounds and hear one thing, and then kind of like shift your perspective and hear something different. That's complexity to me. I heard it described by another cymbalsmith buddy of mine that he likes to think of dark and bright. I don't fully agree with this, but like dark and bright, the difference between it is a dark cymbal. If you ask 10 drummers what the fundamental pitch of it is, they'd all give you different answers. That's a dark cymbal. A brighter cymbal is one where people would be singing the same pitch generally. They would hear the same thing. It's more homogeneous in its sound. And I would substitute the word dark for complex. Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, there's so much, like we said in the beginning, so much of this is subjective. So one person's dark is another person's bright. One person's trashy is another person's sweet. I don't know. We all kind of have our own way of perceiving those sounds. And there's no glossary of terms that says this is what a dark sound is. So a lot of it as a cymbal maker, I've had to spend a lot of time conceptualizing and trying to think about how to interpret what people are saying to me. And usually I can ask certain questions and get people to, hey, send me a clip, like what do you hear? But when you say dark, like send me a recording, you think that cymbal's dark. Then I can kind of start to interpret, start to like put it through a computer program in my brain and kind of go, okay, so this is what the customer is meaning when they say this. I might have my own opinions on that, but I like to, personally, my process is I like to get into the minds of other drummers to see like what do they think. At these shows, I ask people all the time, like, why do you like that cymbal? I asked my wife actually. My wife's not a drummer at all. She can't stand all the drum videos I try to show her. Like, look at this, it's so awesome. She's like, oh God, not another one. But I ask her opinion on sounds, because like I want to know what she's hearing as a lay person, so to speak, as someone who doesn't know all the ins and outs. I also like to ask other musicians. Like as a drummer, this is something I feel like that's helped me a lot is actually asking the band leader or the bassist, like, hey, what do you think of my drum sounds? They're not going to have any of the same terminology, but they're going to give you a very interesting answer, and that answer has a lot of value to it, even though they don't really know what they're talking about from a technical drummer standpoint. Being able to ask sound engineers, something I played a lot of gigs in churches, and I did a lot of like studio stuff, and I would get called before drummers far better than me because I was very open to just always be like trying to ask and glean from what other people are hearing. And a separate thing is that like I got a lot of gigs because I could play quiet. I was not near as good as these other drummers, but they just, they shredded and they were bashing. And they had all the chops in the world. They were phenomenal technique. But I would get the gig because I could go like this. Or even like in an environment where you're playing beat stuff, like church gigs where you're going. It's more like a funk groove, but like something like that. That volume, this is like one of my favorite drummers is Jeff Ballard. Anyone heard Jeff Ballard? So he had this clip that I saw like 15 years ago that blew my mind. He was talking about getting the gig with Chick Corea as like an 18-year-old, and Chick didn't want monitors on stage. And he was like, he had to figure out like, how do I do that? They're playing in a tiny jazz club one night and then an amphitheater the next night. So the sound is wildly different, and then he's trying to play and bring excitement to the music, and he's got to hear the piano, which might be like 20 feet over there, and then there's no monitors. And he's like, what it taught me to think of volume as like you filling up a container with water. Every container, like the venue is the container. So filling up one container that's small is obviously different. There's different volumes in each one, but it might be giving you this might be, in a certain room, this could be like triple forte. Imagine a room with a brick and it's really small, really reflective. That might fill the room in an appropriate way to give you all this energy in the music. And then in a dry room like this, I might need to go. Beyond that, maybe there's, think about the fact that we have all these different instruments that make up.
Rivet, right?
I do have a rivet ride, yeah. This is a wild one, but I'll throw it up here. That's also taking into account the different instruments. We have high frequencies in our cymbals and our snare drum, and then mids and lows in our kick and toms. So if I don't know how to balance my playing, I might be here, but then I might be going. That's not a balanced sound, right? Clearly. So there's this sense of I want to feel this room, and I want to feel what is the appropriate volume for my snare drum and my kick drum. This is low, so that's not going to cut as much. So I might need to really lay into my kick, and then snare's tuned tighter, so I might need to lay off the snare. So. That floor tom is tuned kind of low, so I might need to give that a little something and pull back on the snare drum. And so, that gets into we have cymbals, we have drums, we have this relationship of sounds happening. And so as we're trying as drummers to, find our voice, there's all kinds of things. The idea of mixing yourself to create something that's cohesive out front is huge, I think. It's huge for acoustic music, especially. Maybe it's different in some certain rock genres where you can just wide open, play exactly how you want, and it's fine. I know there are environments like that, but for me, it's man, I want to create a cohesive. I want this to be like an ecosystem that's finely attuned, and everything is translating well. That's all the way down to my main ride cymbal and my hi-hats, and it's down to the way I tune my drums, the way I play. All of it is matters. So. Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that just like music, it'll give you whatever you give it. So the deeper you dive, the more you'll learn. So there's, in the beginning I said with music we want to develop our ears, and a lot of time that means taking in information or listening to certain music that we might not connect with or love. But maybe there's something there that you can say, okay, a lot of people dig this music. I don't like it, but what is it about that music that people dig? You start digging in, you start learning more, and then all of a sudden, for me, I really got into Afrobeat music. Anybody know Fela Kuti and Tony Allen? That stuff is so heavy. I don't play that kind of music. I don't have that life experience to really play that music. But when I hear that kind of slinky groove, I've taken that stuff and kind of infused it into my church gig on Sunday. It's very subtle, but it's feel. It's creating feel. So what does Afrobeat have to do with CCM? Very little, right? But as a drummer, there's something in that I can glean, and it might help me develop my own voice, help me have a sound that's unique from someone else, if I've ingested that stuff. So to answer your question about cymbals, Instagram is a great place to start. Look through the independent cymbalsmiths. Just look up hashtag independent cymbalsmith, and you'll start seeing videos that different people post. And then go to their website and see what they have for sale. Listen to their sound demos. And then start to there's online forums. There was a forum called the Cymbalholic forum back in the day, and there's a lot of that stuff is archived. You can find different articles and stuff, and you'll see how people were wrestling with and thinking about this craft. It is still so new, which is what's exciting about it. Is Roberto passed in 2011, and maybe there was like 5 guys in the late 90s, early 2000s, 5 guys in the world doing it. And now there's like 100 or, round about that number. I don't know exactly. So Dave Collingwood, who's here, has been a mentor for me. I did it for years before I ever went to Dave. I was modifying cymbals for probably like 2 years and did like hundreds of cymbal modifications, hammering, lathing, all kinds of stuff before I ever picked up a blank. And then, he was just there, and the way he is like a teacher, a really, really good teacher, because he doesn't tell you how to do it, because there really isn't like one way to make cymbals. There's a bajillion ways. There's endless ways to make cymbals, different techniques, all that. But like any good teacher, you just kind of clearing out the weeds and giving you more like a seed of some like abstract thought. And he just gives it to you, and then you're thinking about it going, okay, now I need to go into my shop and try it, see what comes out. And then it doesn't ever go like you planned in the beginning. But you learn something, and you garner, and you kind of store it away for later, and it helps you develop. So, yeah, that they need really, really thin, really washy, really dark for it to be a jazz ride. That's one thing. Like if I could do anything, it would be to just try to help move the perception of like what a good jazz cymbal is to what they actually were. Like Tony Williams played a pretty heavy main ride. Like the Nefertiti that we all hear about. Like I see videos online, and it's like, this is a Nefertiti clone, and it weighs like a paper thin ride. I'm like, that is not a Nefertiti sound. That's not what that sound is. And so, and a lot of it has to do with like learning to think past just what you hear behind the kit and a lot of that has to do also with like asking questions. Ask the people that you play for or that play with you or audience members or sound engineers, ask them, how's the balance of the kit? Like, what do you think of the ride cymbal? Is it translating well? And you'll get answers, and it'll kind of help inform you, and you can learn to kind of think past just what you're hearing. So. Yeah, I love just taking a blank with no idea what I'm going to do, and then sitting and just letting 4 hours pass and seeing what.
More than the quantification process.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and I have an apprentice that's been with me for 3 years, and him and I are. He's in every right a great cymbalsmith on his own, and him and I do a lot of stuff together. He does a lot of the mods, and then I come in and like do the last 30% or whatever to finalize it. And it is also fun and challenging to have a very specific idea in mind and challenge myself. Like, can I execute? This person wants this super specific sound. They have this cymbal. They want me to get as close as humanly possible to this cymbal. I like that because it's so challenging. Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. The sticks is like a huge, huge topic, and this will be our last little example. So we'll take this this unlathed ride here, and I'm just going to do a couple different sticks to show you the different kinds of sounds that come just from your stick. So obviously there's also your hand technique. To me, that's like a different cymbal. Like this stick and this stick, two different cymbals. I really like maple sticks. This is actually my favorite stick. It's like Vic Firth doesn't even make it, but it's the Rick Dior signature. I also like the MJ Modern Jazz Collection Vic Firth 4. I like maple sticks because they give you like a warmer, kind of woodier sound. Maple, and especially like maple or hickory with a plastic tip is going to give you more like a pointed, clear sound on top, and that might, so then you can think about the stick that you have with the cymbal. So something that's super warm like this. Maybe I want to take this rock ride. This rock ride is clear and bright. If I play it with this stick that brings out a lot of highs, versus like this maple stick is bringing more warmth into this pretty. It's dark, but it's on the brighter end of the kind of stuff that I make. It's kind of, it could work as a rock ride. And so this maple stick is just pulling it back a little, giving me a touch more warmth. And then there's the technique, I can play with bounce. And you can also develop this technique where you kind of grip the stick in sort of like a clave. And you get this like kind of knocking sound. There's better cymbals to show it on. So. And that's like a Bill Stewart thing, is he has his cymbals kind of like clamped down really hard so it gates the crash. And then he's got this interesting grip that's kind of pulling this knocking sound.
He's adjusting as he goes.
And he's adjusted because he's playing blazing fast, but you're still hearing the knock. Like, it's very hard to get the fast jazz pattern in when you're doing that. Like, it doesn't really work. So he's kind of gripping the stick a little tighter to kind of focus the sound a little bit more. It's a deep well. It's really hard to like spend 1 hour and try to like actually dive into all this stuff. But thank you guys so much for hanging out. Yeah, right. Yeah.